Hello, everyone, and welcome to Produce Talks, the podcast brought to you by the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. I'm your host, Jen Ongtone, Manager of Health and Education at CPMA. Throughout this podcast, we sit down with industry experts and leaders from across the produce supply chain to explore the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities shaping our industry. Let's get started.
Welcome to this episode of Produce Talks. I'm Shannon Sommerauer, Senior Director of Government Relations and Industry Technology at CPMA, and today we're delving into a bite-sized conversation on a topic that is near and dear to my heart and a big part of the work we do at CPMA, the role of advocacy in supporting the fresh produce sector in Canada. Following the federal election this past spring, CPMA hosted a series of meet and greets across Canada to connect new and returning parliamentarians with the fresh produce supply chain in their communities and with the people behind it. I'm joined here today by three of our board members who generously opened their doors and participated in these events. And I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves to you now. George Pitsikoulis. George, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm George Pitsikoulis, President and CEO of Canadawide Food Wholesalers, based in Montreal with distribution throughout Canada, especially Eastern Canada. And I'm also this past year's chair, the one that just finished in Montreal this past April.
Perfect. Thank you, George. Audrey, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. My name is Adri DeWitt, and I am the President and CEO of Fresh Direct Produce, who is situated here in Western Canada in Vancouver, the beautiful city of Vancouver. We do distribute to mostly Western Canada, but we also do distribute some products out to the East Coast. We are a broadline wholesale distributor, so we carry everything from A to Z.
Perfect. Thank you. And Hutch, last but not least.
Happy to be here with you all. Hutch Morton, Senior Vice President of J.E. Russell Produce. We are here in Toronto at the Ontario Food Terminal, and we are not broadline, but have a big list. But I've seen Adri's, and it's not that big.
Perfect. Welcome, all of you, and thanks for taking the time to chat today. Really appreciate it. So, Adri, I wanted to start with you. You're someone a bit newer to this kind of advocacy event. What were your impressions and reflections of engaging with parliamentarians in this way?
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, this was actually my first time doing something like this, and I really didn't know exactly what to expect. But honestly, it was such a great experience. I think what struck me most was how genuinely curious both of the MPs were that actually joined our event. They asked really thoughtful questions about how our industry works, from like the import side to food safety to how we're managing costs and labor. And you could tell that they really, really wanted to understand the challenges that our industry is facing and how they could help. For me, it was also a great reminder that many policymakers don't actually get to see what goes into getting fresh produce every day on the shelves and into the homes of all Canadians. So having to get that opportunity to walk them through what we do and through our facilities and why it actually matters, I thought it felt really meaningful. It reinforced for me how important these kinds of conversations are, not just for awareness, but also for building real connections that can shape better decisions moving forward. Like our industry is so small and really is reliant on relationships. And I was reminded that actually, like even government operates on relationships, which you sometimes don't really know.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that part that you were saying about they don't know what goes into their food. And I think, we'll talk about it a bit more, but at these events, we had an opportunity to really connect with some new folks, new to us and new to Parliament Hill, both. And I think it's such a great opportunity for people to really get a sense of what goes into feeding all their constituents, including themselves. So George and Hutch, you've both participated in CPMA's advocacy events on Parliament Hill in the past. What did you find the same or different about hosting MPs and senators in your own backyard? Maybe George, we'll start with you.
Just to continue on Audrey's point, it's basically that they have a lack of knowledge of everything that goes into what it is that we do. Their knowledge of fresh produce is basically what they see on their grocer's counter and then themselves enjoying it at their home. But just to see how the product arrives, how it's cared for, how it's then redistributed or reformatted before it's redistributed, and all the intricacies with all these products that are all perishable, and how that in itself plays into it. They were quite intrigued. I mean, she was the senator that was here that day. Our session was quite early in the year. I was during it was in August, right? And it was during vacation period, so we only managed to get one senator out, but there were several others that did express interest. Versus, for example, having an advocacy in Ottawa, we're essentially going to their place of work. Yes, they do listen. Yes, all the pertinent points are brought up, and they ask pointed questions and all that. But there are distractions. They're just coming off of one kind of meeting, and their head's full of other ideas, and they're preparing in their head for another meeting. So it's not quite the same. Whereas over here, you have them dedicated. They're listening to the challenges. We were fortunate enough that day to also have Pascal Guérin with us, a large grower over here in Quebec, who was also voicing his concerns with issues that he's confronting. But essentially, that's what I see as the difference, that we had their focused attention over there.
And to your point about just a little bit different mind space, right? When they're back at home in their community, it is different than the Parliament Hill hustle and bustle. Absolutely. A different kind of hustle and bustle, I'm sure. Hutch, how about you?
Yeah, maybe good segue. The hustle and bustle of the Ontario Food Terminal is something that you kind of have to experience and truly experience it on like a busy morning to understand it. So we were lucky that our tour was at 7 a.m. on a Thursday, although we joked with them, like, you guys are late, the day's over kind of thing. But, when you go to Parliament Hill, and yes, you sit with, important and interested people, they want to hear what you have to say. But at the same time, as George said, they're coming out of a different meeting, and there's a group just like yours waiting behind you to go in and pitch what they want to pitch. And so having them here, you get their full attention. And, this place, again, like the sheer volume of people and the product and the action at the terminal, I think really left an impression. One of the MPs, after it was over, said, wow, this was, that was impressive. That was controlled chaos, which I think I take as a compliment. It probably better than had he just said this was chaos and walked away. So it was controlled, but it gave him a real sense for what we do on a day-to-day basis. I think politicians, sometimes it's easy to go to a farm and have your picture taken and hear that story, or retail and talk about the challenge of prices and, the cost of food for Canadians. But to be in the middle of that supply chain, I think definitely left a mark, and was, I think what Adri said, it invited a lot of curiosity.
Yes, absolutely. Curiosity for sure. So a question for all three of you then, were there any particular conversations or connections with the parliamentarians that stood out to you? Hutch, will maybe start with you this time. Go back the other way.
I think as I was talking about, related to sort of where we are in the chain between the farm and between the retail and ultimately the, kitchen table, I think that was interesting for people, and it invited a good conversation with Senator Marnie McBean. So as we walked to the terminal, she came to see these different houses have different temperatures and climates based on the products that were in those houses and being sold and warehoused there. And so, talking about the importance of the cold chain and all of the food safety that's involved in that, and the care that we take, making sure that we handle the product appropriately. That conversation, I think, became even more interesting and acute as we moved from all of the warehouses and the houses of the wholesalers out into the farmers market, where we don't have refrigeration and controlled environment out there. And because it was a summer day, although not the hottest day of the summer, they came to see, okay, now it's 8 a.m. and these strawberries have been out here since 2:30 a.m. maybe. What's this going to look like at 11, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about the consequences for those growers of that. They also had to put on their imagination hat and think about what this farmer's market looks like in February, and to be a farmer out there selling in those conditions. And so Yeah, I think, that conversation with Senator McBean, I thought was impactful.
I mean, everything you were just saying, and to me, something that always strikes me when we're talking to parliamentarians and to government officials in general, honestly, is how much perishability really makes every conversation about fresh produce, no matter the topic, just a little bit different and a little bit more complicated in lots of different ways. And it's something that certainly we keep trying to hammer home. And the food terminal, like you said, having them see that visibly, be able to feel the heat themselves and look at the product and, like you said, put on their imagination hats and think about what that would be like in winter, I think was a really critical reminder of the infrastructure needs that there are to really make sure that we can continue to have safe food and great food across the country, right, in all communities. And the terminal is an excellent example of a place that services so many communities across the country. So yeah, absolutely. Adri, how about you? Anything that stood out from your conversations?
Yeah, so we had two MPs that joined us, but the one conversation that stood out to me was with MP Jeff Kibble. Him and I actually spent because the group was quite large, and him and I at one point, like we sort of stood to the side, and he asked me about labor and how that impacts us, because he saw how many people we had, and then he was very interested in how we operate, and the fact that we're operating like 356 days of the year, and then also 24/7, it's nonstop, and how many shifts and how many different warehouses we have across Canada. So he was really struck by the labor, and then he asked me about like the diversity of our labor, because I think that's one of the keystones for us as a company, is that ethnic side of the business and how we cater to them. And he noticed like the diversity that we had in our labor force. He realized, and he actually made the connection, that us as food distributors have such a big, important job that we play in helping create home to the newcomers, to the diverse country that we have. And it was very impactful for me to see how he actually made that connection. And he saw like the diversity of products that we had in our cooler, and how that was actually super important to really the success of our country, and securing something from home for everybody. It doesn't matter if you come from India or South Africa or from China or wherever. And he never really connected that to us as an important player in the country. So for me, I think that stood out, because I think he took that home like, wow, we play a really important part in just the mental state of the average Canadian.
Yes, absolutely. And what an enormous challenge that is, right? To adapt with the shifting population. I think that's such a key part. We had CPMA actually just yesterday had our embassy lunch, and it's an annual event we do. And we brought together, folks from around the world, as we always do. And the thing that really stood out to them was that piece about Canadian culture is such a diverse mosaic. And we sort of say it commonly, but it is very true. And the opportunities in the fresh produce sector, and the responsibility, as you put it, in the fresh produce sector to serve the needs of all the communities in our country is so, so important. George, we'll wrap up with you on this question. So was there anything that stood out to you? I know you had, as you said, you had the one senator there at the early part of the summer, but I'm sure that also allowed for some more in-depth conversations. So what stood out to you?
The conversation that stood out for me was the discussion in terms of what percentage of fresh produce that we consume here in Canada is imported, right? It's 75 to 80% approximately of everything consumed in Canada is imported from outside of Canada. And, the range of countries that it's imported from, which was quite intriguing, which sort of corroborates what Audrey's talking about. It's the same thing for us across the country with all of our ethnic diversity and different type of makeup. And the reason that became such an important topic at the time in August is because we had these retaliatory tariffs that were still in place, right, for a number of commodities. And the discussion was, well, okay, not only do we import, but it's very important for our growers to export into the U.S. I think it's approximately 80% of the tomatoes grown in Leamington that are exported to the U.S., for example, just to use that one commodity that we were that we had applied retaliatory tariffs. So like the concern was that if we didn't drop the tariffs that we had applied, that they in turn would apply similar types of tariffs on us, and that would have been devastating for a number of industries, in particular the hothouse industry. So she seemed to be taking Senator Susie Yuantz seemed to be taking a lot of notes in regards to that, and of course that fortunately was eventually dropped by us, those retaliatory tariffs, but dropped for the moment. We don't know what the future holds. We're hoping that this all gets settled, but that's the conversation that actually stood out for me.
To your point, George, I think that's a conversation we're going to be having for the next number of months. Yes, very happy that the retaliatory tariffs are no longer in place, and but certainly not a conversation that's done just yet. So lots more to go.
Yeah, and the other thing I just remembered now that we brought up is this issue with the U.S. applying tariffs to other countries. Therefore, the 10% tariff on bananas from Costa Rica that the U.S. is applying, because the bananas make landfall in the U.S., we have to swallow that additional 10%. There's not enough infrastructure set up at the moment in order to be able to be for these products to be transiting in bond. There is a small percentage, but it's not there yet. And at yesterday's embassy event that I also attended, they were telling me that even those 10% tariffs are going up to 15%, apparently, which is not good for us as Canadians as well, right?
Yes, our markets are so interconnected, and I think that's another thing that our government doesn't always fully understand to the extent that maybe they should, and it's definitely something that's important for us to all keep hammering home when we have the opportunity. So, as you all know, Fall Harvest, our annual event, is coming up. So I'll just very quickly, before we really do a full plug for that event, just based on your experience, how important do you think it is for our industry to have face-to-face conversations with policymakers? And maybe, Adri, we'll start with you this time.
I would say that it's incredibly important. As we see, most of these policymakers, they don't really have a good understanding about what makes our industry tick and what we need. And truthfully, our industry touches every single Canadian household. So if we don't have these face-to-face conversations, then we rely simply on them just making their assumptions, and that's not good enough. It is our responsibility to inform them to make better decisions. So I think it's crucial for everyone to get involved.
And the more, the merrier on Parliament Hill, for sure. So Hutch, what would you say? How important do you think it is for folks to be talking face-to-face with parliamentarians and officials?
Yeah, it's critical. I think that it's one of the most important things and essential things that CPMA does on behalf of our industry. And I'm super grateful, have from the beginning felt that way about the role that CPMA plays for us. Our industry has so many good stories to tell. And however, somehow we don't always do the best job of telling those stories. And having people understand the role that we play in, various themes like healthy eating and the farmers, global sourcing and supply chains, the charitable contributions that companies like R3 do and make, school nutrition programs. There's policy impacts to all of those. And so having politicians understand to the best of our ability what is important and what drives our business and what are the pain points, I think that's critical. And then maybe moreover, it's easy to talk about the macro themes of, price and affordability. And, those are things that politicians like to talk about. We have a big part in helping to shape how they think about that and the impact that we can have. And so, we're talking about tariffs a lot these days, and it's already been brought up. So, those are policy and pain points that I think the more that we're out there talking and having FaceTime and having people understand what we do, it's critical.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, I know as a former staffer on Parliament Hill that when food prices go up, when a cost of living in general goes up, those are emails and calls that MPs get from their constituents, right? And that's always going to be the case. So the more that we can help inform them, what good policy, what will be helpful, like you said, that important role that we play, I think is so critical. George, do you want to wrap us up on this one?
Yeah, I fully agree with both Adri and Hutch. It's primordial. I mean, it's the most important thing that we do as an association within the GR. I mean, all this advocacy with all of our policymakers, our government officials. It almost feels like in years gone by, when I first started in this industry, they almost didn't know we existed. They almost took us just for granted. They didn't consider us in many ways. And thanks to the CPMA and all of these efforts that have been ongoing over the years, then there's a lot more knowledge in terms of everything that's going on and all the challenges, especially through all these different situations that always seem to arise one way or another, whether it's due to a global conflict or whether it's due to a trade conflict, border issues, border crossing issues, immigration issues, and therefore affecting the ability to harvest products in field, and that leads to, concerns with food security, which eventually ties in health, as Hutch mentioned. You don't want people to start thinking about eating the way they used to eat. Less produce and more processed things that are easy to do. So I mean, there's always things coming up, and we need our policymakers to be in step with us in order to help reduce whatever risks there are from preventing our products to getting to consumers' homes.
I think, like you said, too, seeing all the parts in the chain is something that makes CPMA a bit unique in terms of trade associations and the group that we can bring together on Parliament Hill. And it is so critical, right? I think it was Hutch was saying, I think a lot of officials have in their mind, at least, what they believe farming to be. It's not always accurate, but they have an idea of what they think they know what that is. And they have a very good sense of what's in the grocery store because they themselves are customers of grocery stores. But that middle piece that is so big and complicated, not always as much in the limelight. And so I think that's something absolutely that is important to continue to bring home. I'm going to move into a very full plug of the Fall Harvest event coming up here because it's my baby and it's coming up. So as you all know, Fall Harvest Advocacy event is coming up in Ottawa at the end of November. So this is a 3-day annual event that CPMA hosts on Parliament Hill with our partners, the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada. And it provides our members with the opportunity to meet with parliamentarians and officials, hear from featured speakers, and network with industry members and decision makers. And I'm giving it an especially full plug because registration and our hotel block are going to be closing very, very soon upon the publication of this podcast. So I really encourage everyone to attend. Very quick then, what advice would you give to people who are attending the first time? Maybe they've considered it, but they go, oh, I don't know. I'm a little nervous talking to officials. I'm not really sure I know what to say. I'm not really sure I know what to do. I'm not really sure it's for me. What advice would you give them? George, maybe we'll start with you.
Do it. Have the experience. Like I only recently started attending these advocacy events, and I'm amazed at everything that goes into policy making. And yes, no, we're not politicians ourselves. It's not what we do in our day-to-day lives, but they don't want us there for that. They want us there for our knowledge in what we do. In bringing this fresh produce to consumers' tables and all that it entails. We have to be there to voice all the challenges that arise with no matter what situation is going on.
Hutch, what would you say? What's your advice for newcomers?
My advice would be to authentically tell them what you do and be unafraid to ask for their support. Like, they're the politicians. They're the ones that have to use the flowery language and say the right things. You can be there telling them about your experience and asking them for help. Like I said before, we have a really good story to tell. We bring fresh produce and healthy food to Canadians. And ideally, we're doing it with the fewest pain points from farm to plate, and they can help us in that. And so to be part of telling that story and asking for help, I think it ends up being fun. I think it can be intimidating at first, but you don't have to be perfect. Really, they just want to hear what it's like for you.
What I always say to people is you are the expert in your own life, your own business, your own experience, and the person you're talking to is really, really not. And so to George's point, that's not what they're not looking for you to be the expert in Parliament Hill. They want you to be the expert in what you do. And so that's so important. And like you said, Hutch, we have a really great story to tell. It is really easy to advocate for healthy, fresh product. That's not hard to convince people that we want more of that, right? So absolutely. And Adri, as our more newcomer, I guess, to these events, what advice would you give? Because you're probably closer to that feeling.
Yeah, I think I'm always one of those people that if you feel intimidated, I'm like, let's just go and do it. So, and that's how I take life, I think. So I would just say to people, just go do it. What do you have to lose? There's no need to be intimidated. Like, there are people like all of us, and yes, they don't know what we do, and they don't expect us to be experts, like Hutch and George was saying. So just be yourself, be curious, and go and try and learn something new and enjoy the experience. Because I think there's always something that you can take back for yourself, for your own personal development as well. So I think just take it as a challenge that could be fun.
Amazing. Yes. And we do our very best to make sure that it is fun and support everyone in there. So really appreciate that, all of you. That does bring us to the end of today's conversation. So a very big thank you again to George Pitsikoulis of Canadawide, Adri DeWitt of Fresh Direct, and Hutch Morton of J.E. Russell Produce for joining me today and for supporting CPMA's work to make sure our sector's issues are front of mind for federal policymakers. It really is truly how we make it all happen. So for those listening, now it's your turn. Join us for Fall Harvest in Ottawa from November 24th to 26th. Registration is free for all CPMA members. Information about this event is available on the CPMA website. We hope to see you there. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Produce Talks. Join us next time as my colleague Dan Duguay, Senior Director of Sustainability, kicks off a mini-series on sustainability, starting with an important discussion on sustainability reporting and the challenges involved in telling our story.
Thank you to our guests and to you, our listeners, for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Produce Talks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies, keep seeking new knowledge, and never stop growing.